Welcome to Just Verdicts with your host, Brendan Lupetin, a podcast dedicated to the pursuit of just verdicts for just cases. Join us for in-depth interviews and discussions of cutting-edge trial strategies that will give you the keys to conquering the courtroom. Produced and powered by LawPods.
All right. Welcome back to Just Verdicts. Today, psyched to have attorney Todd Hollis from Todd J, Hollis Law on the show to talk about great verdict he got in the Everson case. And as I was telling you, Todd, I'm looking at a case kind of like this, so I'm kind of interested, a lot interested to hear about the facts of this and how you pulled this verdict off. But first off, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Hey man, thank you for having me. I watch your podcast all the time, and in fact, I've even looked at a lot of your stuff on YouTube, to help me prepare for some of my cases. So, thank you for having me.
My goofy YouTube channel, where I had my buddy who would make all the crazy add-in videos and edits to my videos to try to jazz them up. But
I
I should
love
get
them.
back into that. Oh,
I'm a
good,
fan. I'm
good.
a fan for sure. For sure.
Well, I appreciate that. And, it's good. I say this frequently when it's friends of mine that get to come, on the show and we get to talk about a great verdict that they got. I like talking with all my guests, but it's particularly fun with people who, I got a past relationship with. And,
Yeah.
you in particular, I give you, a ton of credit because, over the last several years, we've periodically talked a lot. And I remember very distinctly, probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, like you were saying to me, like, I am committed to trying cases. I haven't tried a lot. And you just told me, like, I'm committed, I'm gonna do it. And, here you are. A lot of people kind of say that, or they have that in their mind, and they find ways to kind of, I don't want to not chicken out, but just find ways to settle their cases. And it's hard, honestly, to get into trial and actually get to verdict, win or lose.
Mhm.
And I've been noticing you've been doing that a lot lately. And now you're really seeing some great results. So kudos to you, man.
Hey man, thank you, very much. I do recall some of the conversations that I had with you, and one of the things you said to me is that you have to commit. You have to commit to, you know, making sure that your case goes to trial. I mean, obviously, you don't just want to waste time, but you want to do it on the cases that have value and merit. And, I took that to heart. I've had a trial background, but as many people know, it's always been in criminal court. So, being in a civil trial was very different, but in many ways it was the same. So, I really enjoyed, the opportunity of presenting in front of a jury, the preparation, the planning, the creativity that goes into it. It's something that, I feel very comfortable at. And I like to do it a lot more. So yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for all your help. I mean, I was lost at one point, and because of you, you gave me the confidence to actually jump. And that's what I did. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love it because, I'm sure you're now doing this a lot too. You talk to a lot of people and try to give advice. And, at times I can't help myself. I kind of realize that, because I like trying cases a lot. And,
Yeah.
it's just kind of one of those personal passions. And someone will bring it up and, I want to try cases. And I like start like, I realize I'm like projecting myself on them. And it's like, not everybody is me. Everybody's as their own unique person, and
Absolutely.
going down whatever path it is of trying cases is not necessarily, what everybody's meant to do.
Sure.
But I get excited when somebody, I could really tell when we would talk that, you really were to use the term I apparently said to you, like committed. Like you were like, look, I did the criminal thing. I'm shifting to, plaintiff side. It's this, it's like, it's the same. But it's different. I can imagine. I've never done any criminal defense. And I think sometimes the plaintiff lawyers and the criminal defense lawyers kind of get lumped in together as, similar, but I would imagine, better than I, that the dynamics of how you try a criminal case when you're defending somebody versus, prosecuting a plaintiff's case is there's a lot of overlap just in, how you try a case and how you prepare for it, but they got to be very different, I imagine, right?
You know, the fact that you said that to me, it brings up an interesting situation that I had. It was actually a funny moment. I was trying a federal case not very long ago, and I was talking to the judge, and I mistakenly referred to myself as the defendant. And the room kind of chuckled. I mean, most of them knew that I had, a long criminal trial history. And we kind of laughed for a moment. And then, I said to the judge, I said, man, I'm not used to being on this side. And he says, you're doing just fine, Mr. Hollis. So we all laughed about it. But yeah, in response to your question, the dynamics are different. I mean, when you're trying a criminal case, you have a client whose life interests are at stake, right? You have someone who they may or may not understand the system. I mean, typically they don't. So they're relying on you, to help guide them through that. And, at the same time, they're also adhering to the things that, they brought up believing. A police officer, he can't arrest you unless he reads you your rights. And then you have to explain to him that he can. You know what I mean? A police officer has to do this and he has to do that. And many times what you're telling them is something different than what they understand. And sometimes that creates conflict all by itself because they think, oh, well, maybe, you're working with them. You're not really on my side. So a criminal defense lawyer at certain times, may be adverse to almost everyone in the room, even their own client. Imagine doing that for 20 years. You know what I mean? So it's different. Whereas the civil side, you're arguing about money interests. The defense is, arguing that whatever happened to your client, either it wasn't their fault or to the extent that, they're being asked to take financial responsibility, they're suggesting to you that is not as much as what you want. And then you have you know, the feeling of, what happens when I present this information to a jury? Is a jury going to see it the way I see it? Or are they going to see it the way the defense sees it? And you have your clients, and your clients are depending upon you, depending upon the injury. You may be how this person, exists, for the remainder of their life. I mean, depending on what their injuries are, so you make a mistake, you don't present something, a jury doesn't understand it, and maybe the damages are, minimized. And now, you have to tell your client that, this is the best that you can do if we don't appeal. So there's a lot of stress involved, there's a lot of money involved. It's different in many ways, but when you're standing in front of that jury, and the butterflies that are in your stomach, that nervous feeling that you have. I mean, you could either internalize it or, you can use it to help tell your client's story. That for me is the same. And I love it. I love that energy. You know, when I first started, I think I wasn't comfortable with it. And because I wasn't comfortable with it, I didn't really know how to use it. But now I've been practicing almost 32 years. And I enjoy it. I mean, if I don't get it, I'm upset. Like I want it. I'm looking for it. But yeah.
So you talked a minute ago about, the your ex- getting your clients' stories across, and you have an interesting story from what I know. I mean, I know some of your background, but I don't know a lot. I know like these bits and pieces, and they're very impressive to me.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, like, so you've been practicing for 32 years. You've bootstrapped your firm. You're doing really well now. But one of the many things, as a guy, I got three kids. And, I'm fortunate, my wife holds down the fort of the kids a lot. I mean, I'm there and I'm as present as I can be and everything. But you're a single dad, right?
Yeah, yeah, I'm a single dad. Man, you know what? That's the best thing that ever happened to me. My daughter, in many ways, she saved my life. I think as a young man, you know, we exist, but I don't know that we always have purpose. For me, my daughter is what gave me purpose. And I mean, I believe this. I believe that God gave her to me for a reason. And I promised myself that I was going to be the best father that I possibly could be because God had given me this gift. So, I cleaned my life up, the mistakes that I realized that I was making because I was making bad decisions. I did everything that I could do to learn from that. And I got deeper into my practice. I had to take a jump. The criminal defense bar for me wasn't the direction that I saw my practice going in the latter part of my career. But I had no experience in practicing civil law. I in many ways had to rely on people like you and other lawyers that, cared enough to give me, you know, tidbits of information that would allow me to move my case, my practice to the next level. I mean, I just kind of jumped. I mean, I just jumped. I didn't know if
What
it
did
was
you
going to work
see?
out, but I just jumped.
Yeah. What did you see when you know, single dad, trying to provide, as good of a life as you can for your daughter. You're obviously a driven guy. You have the capacity to do more, expand, and so forth. What was your exposure to, plaintiff contingency work that, even tipped you off to say, hey, maybe there's a whole different avenue of my law practice I can get into from criminal defense?
Phew, man, you asked some great questions. So I recall a Christmas where I was trying to buy Christmas gifts for my son before he passed away. I didn't have much money, but I was doing the best that I could with, what little I had. I didn't want to practice criminal law anymore. I was kind of disenchanted with the whole process of, you know, being in and out of the jails and, begging clients for a couple of $100 here and there. I had just had enough of it. So I was waiting in the parking lot at AutoZone for a client to come and bring me $200. And he showed up, he brought the money. I bought my son a gift. And at that point, Brendan, I had just had enough. I stopped practicing law. I stopped for a year. I bought a hot dog cart and I set up on Carson Street and I sold hot dogs for a year. And at this point, my daughter hadn't been born. So, I think I was just in this place where I was depressed. I didn't see a future practicing law again. And I was just looking for a way out. And that was it. So I did that for a year. And then my daughter was born. And I realized that I could no longer sell hot dogs on the South Side and support her. I had gotten a call from a former client, and he had been pistol whipped by a city of Pittsburgh police officer. I didn't know anything about 1983 actions. I didn't know, I didn't even know how to file a complaint. But this client wanted me to be a part of his case. So I just called friends. I called friends that I knew, and I just said, "Can you help me?" And on that case, I remember it like it was yesterday. I made $16,000, which was more money than I had ever made in my life, as a criminal defense attorney. And I said, God, I don't know if this is going to work. I said, but I have to make it work because I don't have any other options. And I think when you look at life that way, you know, how people say, I'll try, I'll see what happens. For me, it was either you do it or you don't. So, I literally would just, I'd call everybody. I probably called you. I call everybody. Can you give me a complaint? Can you explain to me what this means? Getting on the internet, trying to understand, how to do certain things. Doing everything that I possibly could do, not to even let, my counterpart know that I had no idea what I was doing. But I didn't. I had no idea what I was doing. But I was able to make enough money, or I was able to provide, a better situation for my daughter. And I said to myself, I need to make this work. So I just kept reading, I kept investing in myself, I kept learning, I kept trying. And through the grace of God, I think thus far it's worked out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a particularly religious person, but I mean, that kind of, sounds like, and this will come off corny, but like divine intervention. I mean, given at that sort of crossroads and yeah, I mean, the fact that you had kind of given up on law and then this person calls you out of the blue and that becomes your, foray into the work you're now so well known that you do. And also, I'm sorry to hear about your son. I didn't know that
Yeah, I don't I
about
don't
your
I don't
background.
tell many people. I haven't talked about it for years, but that was a big turning point in my life. I walked out of the criminal courthouse and I said I'm never coming back. And I mean that. It's been 15 years and I said I'm never coming back. And I wouldn't. I'd retire before I took on another criminal case. Unless I it was something I believed in. But short of that, it's just not for me anymore.
So, your initial foray into plaintiff side is civil rights. And, as I know you, that's a lot of what your expertise is. But I also know that you handle, more and more frequently, you're handling all sorts of significant, personal injury cases. And, you clearly have I don't know what I would call it, a following or something, but you have a network of people that, know, like, and trust you with their problems, sort of like that first gentleman did, and I watched you as you've kind of, grown and grown and, moved into these different areas of, the personal injury realm. And it's impressive, especially when, you've got the humility to say that you didn't know what the hell you were doing at the beginning. Cause, so many people, especially lawyers, seem to want to front and not admit like, "Hey, I'm kinda I'm kinda lost here," like, it's like you always have to, like, fake like you know what you're doing and you've got all the answers, and in reality, most people don't.
No, I had no clue. I had no clue what I was doing. Man, this brings back a lot of emotions, but I was just doing my very best to honor my relationship with my kid. You know, I didn't want to be I didn't want to be the kind of person that she didn't look up to, that gave up. I didn't want to be that person. And I'm humble enough to say I need help, you know. And many times I had to have those conversations with my clients. I had to say, listen, I don't know everything. And I can't promise you what's going to happen if you allow me to take on this case. I said, but one, I'm honored that you're even allowing me to be a part of this journey, this very important matter in your life. I'm honored that you're allowing me to be a part of that. One. Two, I promise you, I'll do everything that I can do, to make sure that I tell your story and I honor you. And I think, if you talk to the average ordinary person, that's really what they're most concerned about. You know what I mean? They want to know, are you going to take me seriously? Are you going to be available for me when I call? Are you going to feed me a bunch of bullshit that, I hear when I'm watching these TV commercials and, lawyers are being, verbose and they're not really saying anything. So I've been fortunate, you know what I mean? I've been very fortunate, and Pittsburgh is my home. I've been practicing here my entire life. I left the public defender's office very early in my career, and through the grace of God, I've been able to feed my family, and I'm still learning. So I'm grateful for all of that.
Before we get into the Efferson case, in addition, wisely, because again, that's another thing that I think a lot of younger lawyers or people that are new to a particular industry, they're like afraid to ask people for help, peers or other people that may be doing it longer. And it's such low hanging fruit. And, yeah, sure, you'll meet some assholes who, blow you off or don't care, or they see you as a competitor. And, but a lot of people you'll meet are really good people in this industry that'll bend over backwards to help you.
Absolutely.
In addition to, kind of the goodwill of fellow trial lawyers that were, happy to help in any way they could, as you look back, 15 years on the plaintiff side, any, books or, you know, yeah, I mean, books in general, but like, that have had the biggest influence on sort of how you see or practice, trying cases and working cases up, or just other influences like that, like how you view and what you think is important in trying a case.
Feelings, right? I don't know that it's any particular method. I mean, I know that there is a method, but I believe the most important part, at least as I'm telling your story, is feelings, right? Stories are what I can see a story a whole lot better than you just reading me the facts, right? So passion comes from stories. So when you're listening to your client tell his or her story, I don't necessarily just want to have to, say, on January 26th, 2004, my client, pulled out of Washington Boulevard and was hit in the back as a result of the defendant's negligence. We think, you should award compensatory and punitive damages because she was on her cell phone when she did it. Like, so that's just telling the story. You know what I mean? But being a part of the story is something very different. It's, you know, I pulled out, the parking lot, you know, I was on my way to see my daughter, and, I look both ways. And as I'm, about to go into the lane, suddenly, out of nowhere, this woman who I can see in the rearview mirror, she's looking out on her daggone cell phone. And before I can make, some kind of move to get out the way, the last thing I think about is, oh my God, am I going to die? And then she hits my car. And she hits my car so hard that my head bumps off the front dashboard. And now I'm losing consciousness. And the next thing I realize is that the police are breaking in my window. And they're telling me everything's going to be okay, but I can't feel my legs. And I know it's not. And in that moment, I'm thinking my life is over. So that's an exaggeration of, a common set of facts. But the point I'm trying to make to you is, as I'm telling that story, I think most people can relate to it a whole lot better than an explanation of the facts. So what I focus on is peeling back the onion so that I could get at the core of this person's feelings. And then I want to present it to a jury so that I find a commonality. In Pennsylvania, we don't really have a voir dire process like you do in other states. So you don't always get the opportunity to exclude people based upon their income, their political affiliation, their sexual orientation, their color, their dynamic, their this, their that, whatever. I mean, it's the process isn't really about exclusion, it's about inclusion. It's about being able to identify that one fact or the similar facts that transcend everyone so that anyone, regardless of where they come from, they can relate to that moment. I think that's the process that I use when I'm trying to tell a story, when I'm cross-examining you. And then I'm looking for what they call danger points. I'm looking for problems in my case. You know, would you have a problem? I'm speaking to the jury. As a potential juror, would you have a problem being able to award damages if you can't see my client's injury, you know, in a picture? You know what I mean? Would that bother you? And if it does bother you, tell me why. Right. So again, it's not like me trying to convince you to see it my way. It's me trying to understand you and trying to honor you for sharing your story with me. Right. So you're using this process of inclusiveness as opposed to me saying, well, if I were to call you and you sit on this jury, do you think you can be fair and impartial, listen to the facts and be honest? Of course I can. You know what I mean? Like, who's going to say, well, I don't think so. I really think your client's faking it. This is a waste of time, me being here. And I mean, nobody's going to say that to you. Right. So you want to use whatever opportunity that you have to communicate to a juror, a potential juror, and even the ones that are listening. You want to use that opportunity to build a relationship with that person, right? In hopes that that relationship will carry you forward, to when they're deliberating and they're trying to decide, one, will they see it in your favor, and two, how much will they give you? So I try to do that as early as possible.
I love it. I love it. I think you drop so much good stuff right there that I'm kind of making mental notes of. Because I definitely, get read so much and read all these different things and get caught up on different stuff and methods, as you mentioned, and so forth. And, at the end of the day, a lot of it has to do with, like you said, like getting to like Rick Friedman calls it the moral core. Or, Joe Freed talks about that light switch issue, that idea you mentioned, like, what is the issue in the case that kind of wherever you're coming from, whatever your perspective is, kind of everybody's going to understand this issue and it's going to
Sure.
resonate with pretty much everyone, I think is something that I've been really trying to focus on lately, especially with the jury selection in Allegheny County, which doesn't allow you to in my estimation get to know a ton about people. And so your case better have a pretty unifying issue that you're framing it around, and the central, core concept of what matters to people, or you're probably going to be in trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So can you know explain how you found the story and got to what the core issues are, in this Everson case
Yeah,
that you
absolutely.
tried.
Yeah.
And that was you tried was that this year that you tried that case?
Yeah, yeah. So I tried two cases this year, and Everson was the first case. Yes. So so contextually, right? Everson was about a woman who worked for the federal court system, and she was on her way to work, and she had gotten hit by a driver who was coming in the opposite direction, who I believe had fallen asleep, entered into her lane, hit her head on, and she passed away either in that moment or shortly thereafter. I can't say for sure. However, the person that was driving the oncoming car did not have a valid driver's license. And he was given that car by one of the reputable rental car companies in the city. He apparently had gone to the rental car company, and the rental car company did not do a license check. They did not verify his driver's license to determine if he was a competent driver. Now, the rental car company acknowledged the fact that they did not do a driver's license verification. Well, there's a statute here in Pennsylvania that says that you cannot knowingly or intelligently lease or give a vehicle to anyone who you know or should know is incompetent to drive. And based upon this person's age, based upon the fact that this person did not have a driver's license, it's our position that the rental car company should have known and should have done more to ensure that this person was competent. Now, the question that you asked me is, what was the thing that we believe, bound everyone together that created this tribe, right?
Yeah.
And that thing is, how many rentals, how many cars are on the road from a potential rental car company that, could be operated by somebody who is legally determined not to be a safe or a competent driver. So you can't break the golden rule and say, you know, how would you feel if you were coming down the road and, in the opposite direction, there's somebody that's coming, that's gotten a car that doesn't have a driver's license and could potentially kill you. Although we didn't say that, that was the common theme. You know, it may not just be you. It could be your aunt. It could be your sister. It could be your daughter. It could be your son, and they could be going anywhere. And I think during the course of the trial, the rental car company didn't do themselves any favors because they said that they believe that 15% of the total cars that are leased in a year are potentially leased by people who do not have valid driver's licenses.
They brought that up.
They
That's not
did.
good.
So 15% of potentially 525,000 rentals in a year by this company. How many cars is that on the road throughout this country? And what are you doing to ensure that these people that you're giving these cars to are safe to drive?
Yeah, like there's a reason you're supposed to have a driver's license, right?
Right. And then they're charging. So let's say that I'm under the age of 25, right? I want to rent a car. If I go to this rental car company and I ask to rent this car, they're charging me an additional $25 a day, on top of, the regular rental fee because I'm under the age of 25. And the reason why they're doing that is because they realize that my age group, I represent a higher risk category. So, we refined our trial strategy, and we said, what are you doing with that money? Out of the 525,000, multiply it out by 15%, and now, add $25 to that. That's millions and millions of dollars that you're receiving from this age group category that you've already identified as being in a higher risk category. What are you doing to ensure that this category that you're giving these cars to, that they're safe to drive?
Yeah.
The company had no response.
So a couple different things. First off, was the defendant driver in your case were they under 25?
At the time of the rental, yes.
Yeah. And why did you find out why they didn't have a license or an active license?
They had a prior DUI.
And had their license been revoked?
Yes, was suspended.
Wow. I mean, that had to be, in the Mark Mandel kind of the I can't get over issue in the case, right? I mean, to me, as I'm sitting here, it's like, well, how if they're not allowed to legally drive themselves, like how are you okay, car rental company, giving this person a vehicle, without knowing if they're licensed and permitted by law to drive? That's crazy to me.
Because you put profits over people, right? I mean, you know that I mean, let's face it. I mean, young people, they like to rent cars. Young people like to rent cars. So if that is a large income base for your company, it's hard to say no to that, I guess, from their standpoint,
Yeah.
right? So our our position was, well, we're in 2025. What attempts has the company made to do license verification checks? You know, the rental car company says, well, we're not obligated to do that. The legislature didn't say that we had to do that. Well, the legislator may not have specifically said that you have to do a license background check, but the legislator did say that you cannot give a vehicle to a person that is incompetent to drive. You can't give a car to that person. And what steps have you taken to make sure that the people of Pittsburgh, wink, wink, the people in our community, wink, wink, are safe? So obviously the jury, they're members of our community. They're
Yeah.
members who drive up and down the streets, of the city of Pittsburgh and outlying areas, you know, and they have family members. So that was the way that we were kind of able to get into you know, how this rental car company's actions were not just making, our client unsafe and ultimately led to her death, but it was also, a regular practice that they were doing where they were placing profits over safety.
Yeah.
And the biggest part of our damages came from punitive damages. Wasn't necessarily compensatory. I think we got 300 plus $1,000 in compensatory damages, and was it 500,000? I think it was 500,000. All right. And we got millions in punitive damages. And I don't want to give you the numbers. I don't necessarily remember the exact number, but we
Yeah.
got millions of dollars in punitive damages because I realized, you know, that was the connection that we needed to make, and our situation, we had to tell the jury this is not about enriching our client, but it's more about punishing the defendant for what they didn't do when they knew they should have done more.
So, okay, I got a whole bunch of questions for you about this. So, some sort of fact specific ones, and then some, some more strategy and case specific questions. So defendant driver causes this crash. You say you think probably they fell asleep in order for them to, cross over the midline, hit your client head on, right?
Yes.
What can you tell me a little bit about your client, as much as you're comfortable telling us, like age, lot in life, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So our client was older. I mean, she was in her early 60s. If I remember correctly, she was she worked as a housekeeper for a company that cleaned the federal courthouse. She was the matriarch of her family. She was like a homemaker, very handy. She loved to embroider. She loved to sew. you know, I mean, you might drive by her house and see her, putting up a fence, or putting concrete down. I mean, she was hands on, and you know, she was that grandmother that you can envision when you come over for Thanksgiving. She was that person, and everybody loved her. She's just a beautiful, beautiful soul. I think, because she didn't have a lot of hard numbers, she was a little older in life. I think the compensatory damages were conservative, right? And I think we could have probably done a better job with kind of like laying that out. But I think that, where we kind of hit home was, the punitive side.
Yeah.
So, you learn a lot in every trial. We, cumulatively got what, 4 million bucks. I think maybe, this case is being appealed. So I think we do better if we go back to trial. I think we do a better job, of, explaining to the jury, you know, what I think we do a better job with explaining to the jury just how valuable her life was, right? We do a
Well,
better job of explaining to the jury, why this company should be punished, for what they did. So,
but I can see, trying to put myself in your shoes in that case. It's like, because going back to, you're telling me these facts and I'm like, dude, this is crazy. Like, so to me, I'm just like focused on that company. Like, this is reckless. You got to pay. And I think my sights are set on the punitive aspect of it.
mhm.
That somebody needs to punish them and make an example that this is not okay in our community. Which, again, trying cases is tough because you don't even realize that you're getting so focused on one thing, and then maybe in hindsight you're like, you know, well, I did that and we did a really good job of that. Case in point, the verdict. But man, in hindsight, maybe we could have worked up the story of her life more, on that front. And again, that's that, that it's like part of trial. It's hard to, kind of keep all the plates spinning at the same time, you know.
Yeah, I remember something that you said to me, a couple of years ago. You said it's life-changing money, right? I mean, we obviously, put this family in a position where, they are going to receive life-changing money. It may not have been the amount that I saw in my mind, but maybe it puts this family in a position where they no longer have to work. They can now forecast, an education for their grandchildren. They can pay off the house. They can create generational wealth. So to that end, maybe it didn't go exactly the way I wanted it to go, but even though we fell short of that mark, I still think we did a good job.
Dude, and I'm not even remotely suggesting you fell short. I'm just imagining, you know what I mean? Like every time I try a case, win or lose, there's always aspects of it, where I'm like, this went well, I got lucky there. This was a nice break that we caught. This went bad. I
Yes.
should have done this differently. Boy, I like completely overlooked. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
You
that
always
and that's
second
just
guess yourself. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and it's I don't know if it's even second guess so much. I mean, it's just, you're kind of always looking. I mean, if you're trying to improve, then you're looking at, well, what could I have done better also? Like, I mean, it's an amazing verdict, end of story.
Thank
I
you for
just think
saying.
it's interesting on that one where you have those two competing things. Like you have the death of this woman in this story, but I'm just, from my perspective, I'm seeing red of this company and I'm in there and all my focus is gonna be on, lighting them up on the punitives. But I have a question, another I have lots of them, but what was the defense? I mean, they what, 15 we do this with 15% of people, so it's just the way we do business and, no harm, no foul?
Well, The defense seemed to be that the legislature did not require this company to do electronic background scans. That seemed to be their defense. I, you know, didn't make sense to me, but I mean, that was what they presented.
Yeah. Well, it seems sometimes like I think there are situations like when I do focus groups and stuff like that, I do find that there's a group of people that, like, well, what was the standard and did they violate it? But I think that sometimes when the overall balance of ease with which you could mitigate the risk versus, the potential consequences if you don't, a defense like that is just never going to work because you're talking about giving people basically a weapon to go get out on the road with, and
Yeah,
they could, maim and kill anybody, so then you've
absolutely.
got,
Right.
you've got, reptilian brain edge type theory in there with spreading the tentacles. I mean, a jury's easily going to just imagine themselves or their loved ones, and they're going to want to send a message that, to the rental car companies, like, this isn't okay. I don't care if the legislature says that we can do that you could do this or not do this. You know better as a company.
Right. And that's essentially what the jury said. When we talked to the jury, after the case was over, that's essentially what they said. You know, I think they were they probably would have given us more if our compensatory damages had been higher. One of the jurors, believe it or not, he said, you know, we were concerned about how much to give in punitive damages because we knew that the punitive damages couldn't be more than 10 times the compensatory damages.
Now, how the hell do they know that unless they
I
did
was
some
I was
research?
I was blown away. I was blown away. I was like,
Because, dude,
wow.
like, their number was like 10. It was like 10. It was like, right?
It was 10. Now
That's
now I recall.
wild.
So yeah, it was 10. So, they were very smart,
Yeah.
right? They put a lot of thought into the number. They didn't put a whole lot of thought into determining whether the company was responsible. Like that was very quick and immediate.
Yeah.
They put more thought into determining how much they were going to give us because they wanted to make sure that it was within the bounds of the law. And how this young man knew that, I'll never know, but he knew that.
And as you bring that up, I imagine another sort of, whether it was a direct or implied defense, was also dump on the driver. That ultimately the person that's responsible here is the person who's behind the wheel that caused the crash, right?
Yeah, so they found the driver to be 70% responsible. They found the rental car company to be 30% responsible.
Okay. And then because of Spencer, I'm assuming you can probably recover all from them, right?
Absolutely.
Because your client obviously was not found in any way responsible. Yeah.
Oh, and that was another thing. So we learned that they were potentially going to call an expert who is going to say that our client was driving 1 mile over the speed limit. And because she was driving 1 mile over the speed limit, they were going to somehow try to say that she was responsible and she should also, be held, you know, contributorily negligent. And we were going to lean into that. Like,
Yeah,
we were
right.
hoping that they presented that, but I think somewhere along the line they realized just how absurd saying that would be and the potential inflammatory response that they might get from the jury. So they didn't. Right. So
Did you try the case with anyone?
I did. I tried the case with David Therusalem and Keith West. Both of them were Philadelphia attorneys.
And how was it, trying a case? I imagine, had you ever tried a case with other than before?
First time.
What, I mean, I'll try cases with different people from my office. I don't think I've tried a case with a completely different lawyer outside of my firm. I mean, clearly you guys must have worked well together.
Yeah. I mean, everybody works differently, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Everybody works differently. I mean, the way that I prepare is a little bit different from the way they prepared, but we were all very experienced lawyers. And to that end, there may have been some times when, we were just all a little stressed and maybe somebody was a little snappy, but, at the end of the day, I mean, these guys were just very good at what they did. They were just awesome. And, we all kind of picked something that we believe that we could do. Now, again, I didn't have a whole lot of civil trial experience. So at least for that trial, I relied a great deal on them to kind of help walk me through procedurally, how civil trials are run as opposed to how criminal trials are. And, we got along great.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, even I mean, Greg's my main man. I try my cases with,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you know, if we don't have at least a couple, you know, annoyed exchanges with each other, me in particular, I'm the difficult one. Greg is a prince to work with.
You're the problem, not him,
I
right?
am. No, 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 totally. I can be a know-it-all at times, even though I don't know it all. But that, I think, just kinda goes with the process, and then I think that's good for memories, and,
Yeah.
if you guys can work through it, then I think it just kinda adds to, the passion of the case, because it's like despite, whatever else is going on, you're working through it and getting that message across to that jury. How did you guys approach the opening? And also, I'm curious, what were punitives in from the jump, and it was always gonna be punitives? So there was no bifurcation on punitives or anything?
No,
Okay.
no.
So the
So I did
opening
the
and the
opening.
yeah,
So I did the opening.
so you must have explained that to the jury that there's basically kind of a couple different things they have to consider. I mean, there's the, wrongful death and survival components, to the extent there even was survival, but then there's also this punitive aspect for them to consider, right?
We focused on damages.
Yeah.
We focused on stories. We told the jury who Mrs. Everson was. We explained how the accident happened. We talked about how she must have suffered. We talked about what role that each defendant played that led to her death. Obviously, the focus was not as much on the driver as it was on the rental car company. We were very deliberate in our presentation of that story so that we could show the jury, not necessarily tell the jury, but show the jury how she died, how long it took before she died, and what she meant to the family. And the family was there throughout the entire trial. I use I use TrialPad now.
Okay. So do you use that for calling up exhibits throughout the course of your trial?
I use TrialPad for everything, right?
Nice.
So we had a screen that was probably 20 feet. It looked like a movie screen, right?
Oh, I know them well. Did you guys get it yourself, or did you have a company bring it in?
At that time, it was the first opportunity that I had ever seen a screen like that. I since bought one. I
Oh,
bought one.
damn.
Yeah,
You
but
bought the big one with like the big metal, like the
yeah,
dude,
yeah,
you're
I bought
crazy. I
I
love
bought
it.
I have it with me right now, right?
Dude,
So
let me tell you one quick story.
yeah,
So I remember when I was like trying cases and just getting my ass handed to me for years, but I was just like loving it. I'm like, I'm gonna figure this out, blah blah blah. And I would go watch everybody else's trials across the street, and I remember I walked into somebody's trial, and they had the big screen up,
yeah,
and I was just like, "Damn, look at that. That's amazing." And I was like, "One day, I'm gonna have a big screen in one of my trials." And
yeah,
I remember the first time I tried a case and had enough, I guess, money to invest in it, that we had the big screen, and I just, like, I remember walking in, there was, like, nobody else even in the courtroom, and I just kinda, like, stood there, I was like, man, I've arrived. They got the big screen now. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, no, no. So I tried this case with Aaron Weiss and Jeff Romali, amazing lawyers. I mean, I guess if I ever got in trouble, I want them as my lawyers. But we tried this case with them, and they had actually rented the screen. So
Okay.
yeah, so I come into the courtroom and I see like the screen. It looks like something that you would see at like a football stadium, or
Yeah. Yeah.
it's huge. So I used the screen. I mean, as I when I first started my opening, I think I said to the jury something to the effect of, before I can, no, I said, as I stand here before you, I can't ignore the fact that I'm nervous. I can't ignore the fact that, there's butterflies in my stomach. I said, and my knees might be shaking a little bit. And I'm not nervous because of my inability to tell the story. I said, I'm nervous because I want to make sure that I honor my client and her story, and that I respect, the trust that her family has given to me. And I point to her family. I said, but before I can tell her story, I think you need to know who my client is. And then I take my trial pad and I hit one button, and then her face appears on this screen, and she's like 30 feet high and 20 feet tall. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I believe that at that point you're putting a face to the name, right? And when people see, when they see pictures, they start to form connections, right? Or disconnections, I guess, depending upon the person. But that process at that point, that's where it starts. So that was my role. That's what I wanted. I wanted to kind of bring the jury to our side in that moment. And I wanted the jury to meet my client as I'm talking about who she is. I didn't get into a whole lot of, what the cause of action says, and, defining, compensatory damages and
Yeah.
punitive damages. I didn't get, because I knew that we would address that during the closing. But at least for the opening, I wanted to build credibility. I wanted to build a relationship, and I wanted to do it as early as I possibly could. And I used, those methods to do it. And I believe that to some degree it was successful, because, we could see the jurors kind of like, you can recognize facial expressions,
Yeah, they're
and you see
engaged.
that in that moment, they realized that this case was more than just about, you know, us explaining a police report. They had an actual person's life in their hands. And that's how we presented our opening.
Love it. Like, briefly, how did you approach like your order of witnesses?
I didn't really as much, because the senior trial counsel, who was David Jerusalem, he pretty much decided how we were going to go about that process. The one thing that I sort of made sure that we did is I wanted to make sure that our client was sort of like the last thing that they
Yeah.
heard, that the jury heard, right? So we wanted to make sure that, our client, you know, connected all of the dots, and, he told the jury who his wife was and what his wife meant, not just to him, but to his daughter, to his son, to his grandchildren, right?
Yeah.
And we think he did an amazing job in that process.
I heard you earlier mention, talking about how she must have suffered, Mrs. Everson, that is. Did you have an expert on survival, on conscious pain and suffering, or
We did.
fear? Just,
Absolutely.
I'm always interested in that testimony. So how did that play out, and what was the general opinion they offered?
So what he said was physiologically, there is a certain amount of air that the heart retains, and that even though, certain parts of her body may have been mortally wounded, that the heart contained so much liters of blood, and as it was continuing to pump, it was also pumping that blood to her brain. Now it's powerful.
Hmm.
That was powerful. And what that told the jury is that she was a witness to her own death.
Yeah.
That the car that she was, the car that she, and I'm getting emotional as I think about it, but the car that she was lying outside of on Frankstown Avenue, in the cold morning, was going to be the final place of her death. She was no longer going to see her husband. She was no longer going to have a relationship with her grandchildren. Her life was ending in that moment, and she was a witness to it. And, I think, we saw tears that were coming out of some of the jurors' eyes, right? So we honored that. You know what I mean when I say honor? Meaning, we didn't flood them with information to kind of like, get through a difficult moment. We took the time to give the jury an understanding, an opportunity to appreciate that moment. You know, I can't imagine, as I'm driving down Frankstown Avenue or any street as I'm on my way to work, after I've just kissed my daughter goodbye and I said, baby, I'll see you later after school, that somebody's going to come around the corner driving 65 plus miles an hour in a 35-mile-an-hour zone, hit me head on so hard that, I'm ejected from the car. And now I've got 20 seconds where I'm able to appreciate the fact that I'm dying. And I don't have my family there. You know what I mean? I don't have an opportunity to change anything. I'm dying in that moment, and I'm going to die alone. Imagine the gravity of that feeling. Not when it applies to somebody that you can see on a screen, but apply it to, your relationship with your family.
Yeah.
I think we did a pretty good job with that.
Clearly. What just a couple more questions. From a punitive standpoint, did you either have an economist talk about value of them or their profits, and what did that boil down to? Like, what were the financial numbers that the jury could consider as far as, how to balance, punishment versus, not being, violative of you know, their due process and so forth?
So we definitely had an economist, and our economist was a little higher than their economist. I think the jury kind of like, they found the median between both experts that were presented. I feel like we didn't do a great job explaining compensatory damages, right? I don't think we did a great job in that role, because the jury really didn't consider pain and suffering. They listened to what the economist said to them, and the number that the economist assigned, which I believe was somewhere around $380,000, something to that effect.
And
And
that
that's
and
pretty
what
much
was that number representing from The Economist? Like her earnings or what?
compensatory damages.
But compensatory for, like,
lost wages,
okay.
you
Yeah.
know.
And so that's kind of what they awarded. I mean, or that was kind of what they
Yeah.
got anchored to, interestingly.
Yeah, that's exactly what they got anchored to.
Okay.
And I think we should have presented it, and I don't want to tell too much because I don't want my opponents when they file this appeal to know where I'm going with it. But I think, had I had an opportunity to try this again, I would have put more into, how much life means, how much health means,
Yeah.
the fact that, you know, the experts, estimate as to her lost wages is not the total essence of what compensatory damages, you know, include.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think the jury understood that, and I think largely they didn't understand it because we didn't explain it the way we should have explained it. So again, that's one of those kind of things when you look back and you say, I could have did a better job doing
We're
this.
always learning, man.
Yeah. Where I think we did a great job is explaining, why it should be punished, right? So what they did is they took the number that they were given from the compensatory side and it basically just multiplied it by 10.
Did they have a number of like the net worth or the net profits for the year in question from it, or were they not, was that not given to them?
And we weren't allowed to introduce that.
Really? So
Yeah.
there was no real net worth discussion that came into the case.
We
Oh,
weren't
that's
allowed to do that.
interesting. Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. So so then someone back there knows 10x is the magic number for punitives.
Yeah.
They 10x it. So
Yeah.
was it a relatively quick deliberation then?
So they broke. I want to say we broke basically towards the end of the day. I think the judge, kind of like allowed them to deliberate to the end of the day. And then we came back the next day. And I believe they had a verdict by lunch.
Oh,
That's my recollection.
yeah. No, that's long enough.
Yeah.
And I saw on social somewhere that there had been a 500K offer and you guys pushed forward to trial.
I thought that was insulting, right? I mean, from my standpoint, you're saying that a black woman's life is worth $500,000.
Yeah.
Like she played zero role in the events that led up to her death. And you're saying $500,000 is the number? And, Brendan, I've gotten to a point in my career where I believe that accountability is worth way more than money, right? Accountability is worth way more than money. And I spent enough time with my client that he saw it the same way. His family saw it the same way. And there was some freedom in that because, we didn't hesitate when we said, no, thank you. No, thank you. And, when the jury came back with the verdict, I mean, it was gratifying, right? It was gratifying. But to offer $500,000 that basically says, we don't believe you're going to try this case. We don't believe this woman's life is worth more than that. And, you know, take it or leave it. So we said, we're going to leave it. And that's where we left it. So,
Good for you, man. Right? I mean, I feel like, those were the conversations we were having a few years ago. It's like,
I recall that. Yeah.
like,
I recall you telling me that. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, but I mean, look, dude, it's easy to tell someone stuff. I don't, whatever you do. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's you. I mean, it's you and your trial team making that decision and having that, because that is not a pleasant conversation to have. I mean, even though everybody, like, your clients are on board with accountability, you still have to bring it home. I mean, there's still
do.
always that sort of, at least for me, that sort of unsettled feeling of, but what if we lose, or what if we get less, or what if we get the same? And, I think that if you truly believe it, you feel it in your heart that the case is just worth more, and the accountability is worth more than what they're offering, then, I think that's, amazing trial lawyering to be brave enough to go do that. And then the fact that you guys did it, and you hit for so much more, in a weird way, that's almost to me secondary than making the decision from an accountability, from a principal perspective, that, this is just not a fair and reasonable number for this case. And we're willing to accept the consequences of what happens to, try to hold them accountable. And you did.
Yeah, they
It's
made it. I think they
amazing.
made it easy for us. Right? They made it easy for us to say no. I mean, you know, I don't know if they had offered $3 million, you know, before we went to trial, would we have said the same thing? Would my client have said the same thing? I don't know.
I
You
don't
know?
know, Todd.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it was easier for you guys, and I think that probably speaks to, your growing confidence to, go try these cases. Um, but there's probably a not insignificant number of lawyers out there that would have, had a serious talk, and all of a sudden their client's like, okay, yeah, we'll take the 500, and the case never sees the light of day at trial. So,
I just
I
think that sends the wrong message.
well, good
I
for you,
mean,
man.
it's yeah, it sends the wrong message, to the client. It sends the wrong message to the lawyer that should have probably tried the case. I mean, it just sends the wrong message. And I remember, what you told me, and you said, you form a reputation, when you start to accept unreasonable numbers. And I had made a conscious decision that I was not going to allow that to happen. And furthermore, I wasn't ever going to minimize my client's I wasn't going to minimize my client's honor. I just wasn't. I refused. And they made it easy for me, to go in there guns banging and to present my client. And, I mean, I'll never forget that trial, because it was the first civil trial that I ever won. You know what I mean? I lost one in Beaver when I first got into this business, and it was heartbreaking. So, to win one, it feels pretty good.
Yeah, you'll never forget that.
Yeah.
So, well earned, well deserved, man. And I think that's a good place to leave things. So, Todd, thanks for for sharing your story, sharing the case story, your approach to this trial. I got a ton out of it, and just awesome to see and be, having this conversation about this topic, you know, given where, things were years ago. So just can't give you enough credit. And I mean, we already have another case to do a podcast about. So you're on a roll, and I'm sure we'll be having you back as a guest soon, man.
Hey man, I'm so honored that you allowed me to be a part of this show, and I mean, it meant a lot to me. I've been thinking about it ever since you asked me, to be on here, and I think the world of you, and every opportunity that I get, to get some nuggets of information from you, I'm like a sponge. I'm definitely an open sponge. So, thank you again, and I appreciate your time.
Honor's all mine, man. That's Todd Hollis from Todd J, Hollis Law. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
If you enjoy the show, please subscribe to the Just Verdicts podcast on your favorite platform and consider leaving a review. And if you're interested in co-counseling, local counseling, or referring a catastrophic injury case, we'd love to work with you. Call us at 412-281-4100 or visit our attorney referral page at pamedmal.com/refer. Thanks for listening.